We've now got governments in our eastern states getting absolutely desperate for your money because they're so in debt now. In fact, none are more so than the socialist state of Victoria, where, look, if you thought New South Wales debt was bad, $114 billion, look at Victoria's $171 billion, extraordinary. And you could see how desperate that government is. And our socialists today, when the Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews said, well, if you've got a property that you've put on Airbnb or that you're renting out yourself for short stays to earn some extra income, maybe for your retirement, well, forget it. It's going to grab 7.5% of your takings because it thinks those houses that you own should really go to permanent renters. The immigration intake in this country is so crazy that, well, the Victorian government needs your home. Joining me is the panel, Michael Costa, former New South Wales Labor Treasurer, and David Gazzard, former Liberal advisor, now head of DPG Advisory Solutions. I mean, Michael, that is so arrogant. A government deciding you are not using your own property in a way that it likes, so you must pay.
Oh, it's outrageous, Andrew. It essentially what you said. This is the worst form of sort of creeping socialism that you can find, and it is from a government that's, grossly in debt and has no real strategy to get out of that debt, even if it wanted to, other than more and more tax measures. And the outrageous thing about this, it's not as if these people are not paying tax. All that extra income is already taxed by the federal government. And clearly, this is just a double set of taxation on a personal property asset. And, clearly the government down there doesn't respect private property, and we're seeing the consequences of that.
But David Gazzard, am I overreacting here? Because it really does seem to me they think they own, in a sense, a stake of your property. They can determine what is a proper use of it or not.
Well, this is the end point of a government that has overspent for years and years and years. They've spent $1 billion to not build a road. They're spending compensation, who knows how much it's going to be, to not have the Commonwealth Games. They spent billions in lost revenue to make you stay at home because Daniel Andrews had polling that showed that it made him look strong to keep you, locked up in your home. So the consequences are there, but pity the people who have bought these homes as an investment strategy to try to make it through to the end to retire, right? This has been their thing. So cost of living issues are raging everywhere. And what has been the response of the Andrews government? Well, to make it worse for a whole range of people that have tried to invest to cover their future or just tried to build a property portfolio. So it's the natural consequence of a government that's mismanaged itself.
Yeah, no point in being thrifty, I don't think, not in Victoria. But again, Michael, the huge immigration intake is behind so much in politics now like this. I mean, they're running short of houses, right, in Victoria, so, well, everywhere, really. So this is one way of doing it, pinch the privately owned ones. Yesterday, though, the New South Wales Labor government handed down its first budget, a surplus. But here again, the trick in there, a lot of that surplus comes from having high levels of immigration, adding more workers, but we'll pay for it in the long term. What do you make of it?
Well, firstly, I mean, let's get the positives. At least you've got a government that finally, in New South Wales, recognises that debt's a problem. I mean, the previous Green Liberal government never recognised there was a problem. So I've got to give them credit for that. And they've restructured the capital program, which I think was the right thing to do, and that's saved them some money. However, on the other side, they've set themselves up for some real problems with the structural deficit going forward because they've increased public sector wages under the hope they're going to get some productivity in the future, which I can tell you from experience is very difficult to do. But you're right, the short-term ability to at least project a surplus, they're yet to deliver it, is due to property taxes, land taxes and payroll taxes, which are, yes, partly driven by immigration. But for the states, it's a double whammy, Andrew, because it's not all positive for them, this immigration. They've got to provide the infrastructure, they've got to provide the roads, they've got to provide, the water, the sewage, everything else, the schools. And that brings a huge cost to state governments, which they really can't recoup from the taxation base that they have. That's why they've got structural deficits, and it's a major problem. I mean, even yesterday they announced a paltry amount of housing over a 15-year period, which is just going to be a drop in the ocean compared to what's required. So look, you're right. Property taxes help state governments, but ultimately it's a no-win, dead-end economic strategy.
Yeah. But that bill that you talk about, having to pay, spend more on water supplies and roads and hospitals and schools and all that, that's down the road, Michael. That's down the road. Instant sugar hit. Worry about it later. Yeah, but why, David, why are governments, you've been advising these guys for years, why are governments so addicted to high immigration when the polls say the public are suspicious of it?
Well, I agree with Michael on what he's just said there. I've always been of the view that an economy that is not growing its population base is at a population that's in decline. It's a country that's in decline. And so there's two ways to accomplish that. One, you have more children, which we're not doing, or you have to increase your population by immigration, which the government is doing, right? But the infrastructure and housing has to keep up with that. And we've seen this sort of crazy urban consolidation scheme in various state governments where they dribble out land release, which artificially inflates the price of the land. And it also restrains the amount that you have to spend on infrastructure. So you can keep your stamp duty revenue really high by making sure that you've constricted the supply, and you don't have to put the roads in, the schools in, the electricity systems in. So you get the population growth paying enormous prices for houses, and you don't have to spend the money on supplying the services to those houses. Everyone in state government wins, right? And that's where they found themselves. And
there's also the problem of planning.
I hear your argument, David, about more immigration, otherwise you're declining. I don't know, it's a Ponzi scheme. Where do you finally draw the line? But the point is, this is at insane levels. I don't think any country in the Western world is growing at the rate that we're growing right now. This is an excess. By the way, Michael, the government's going to tomorrow announce that inquiry by experts in the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, not the Royal Commission it promised. Are you expecting much out of it as a consequence?
Well, look, Andrew, I expect very little out of it by virtue of the fact that it's got experts on it. I mean, we went through the pandemic and every expert was wrong. In some other countries are worse than ours, I might say, and you had certainly a collusion of special interests, credentialed special interest, that led to one of the worst responses to the pandemic, and certainly in terms of the economic consequences, we're still suffering from that. Really, it comes down to the terms of reference. I would rather see people that are completely independent from the medical and community and the vested interest, the pharmaceutical interest, everybody else involved, having a look at this, because the way it was handled was appalling. And we know from Sweden and places like that, it didn't have to be handled this way.
Correct. David Gazzard, I'm out of time, but I just need to hear from you. I mean, maybe, I think they'll get away with it because the public is sick of hearing about that terrible time. They don't want to know about it.
Well, I think an inquiry is a worthwhile exercise, but as long as it's a fair income inquiry. So we saw our economy stress tested like never before, and probably the tectonic plates of state and federal responsibilities, came under stress as never before. So it would be great if the inquiry looked at all the issues, state and federal, particularly states, and made some recommendations that actually paved the way, so we wouldn't find ourselves, the next pandemic comes along, we wouldn't find ourselves in the same situation. Good luck.
Seeing how it was so driven by raw politics, David, I think we're whistling in the dark, thinking that won't happen again. I wish you were right, crikey. David Gazzard, Michael Costa, thank you both for your time.